All right, it looks like we are live. Let me double check. Look on LinkedIn, see if I see myself. So far, nothing. Let's check. See, if someone sees us, can you comment? Aha, wait, I think I found us. Let's see. Yes, we are live. Awesome. Very cool. Awesome. All right. Sorry about that. It's always difficult when you first get the live stream started to see if it's actually kicked off. And we should be live on both LinkedIn and YouTube. Before I get started, just so you're aware, if you have any questions, just leave them as comments on the actual LinkedIn live feed. So I will be able to see them on our end, and then we can make sure that they get answered. So yeah, just put comments live while we are. Actually, let me pull up where that feed will be. That way I can see questions as they come in immediately. Cool. All right, with that, I'll go ahead and get rolling. My name's Alex. I'm on the product marketing team here at Gravitee, and I'm joined by Anthony Gatti, who is the product manager for Gravitee API Management, the API gateway and management platform that you all love so much. And we're going to be talking about Gravitee APIM 4.2. The release happened several weeks ago. We've pushed some content recently. I'll share links to that in the comments throughout this session. We do want to, we'd like to join LinkedIn and let you all know live what we think the major highlights are, what it means for you, and how to get started with them. So with that, quick agenda we'll be covering. I already did housekeeping. Yeah, questions in the comments if you want. And then we'll cover some of the highlights. So the big three, and there's a few more we'll sort of touch on. It's the new TCP proxy API in Gravitee. We'll be talking about documentation in the UI for V4 and event APIs. We've had it in the past by using the management API for these kinds of APIs, but as of now, it is in the GUI, and then some enhancements for Kafka event APIs. And if you're new to Gravitee, we're not going to go do a whole Gravitee platform overview by any means, but we'll give a little bit of background and context for what we even mean by V4 and Kafka event APIs and such. And then Anthony has joined to, of course, supplement where I hit my technical ceiling and give us some demos of some of the new features. So with that, we'll go ahead and get rolling. TCP proxy APIs. So at the end of the day, we are bringing Gravitee to layer 4. I'm not going to go through the 7 layers of the OSI model. There's lots of good blogs and such out there if you want to learn more. But at the end of the day, we are essentially allowing folks to expose more kinds of things at much lower latency via APIs via our API gateway. So what exactly is it? So I mentioned before, it's a layer 4 low-level proxy for TCP connections. Essentially anything that exposes packets over TCP, you can expose it via the gateway via TCP proxy API. There's no extra protocol layered on top, no headers, no methods, etc., which helps sort of drive this extra benefit of being lower latency. No data serialization, just packets. So that is important to know especially for this release. But the big thing, what you all are probably wondering is why. I already mentioned earlier, might have high throughputs, very low latency, because you don't have to do a bunch of stuff with things layered on top. Things can be much, much faster, even if you are pushing and exposing a ton of data. Also allows you to proxy non-standard data formats. So we already have a super broad offering as it pertains to what you can actually expose and proxy with Gravitee. We'll cover that in a second. And this just sort of adds to that menu, right? So think about things like WCF, HL7, potentially video, typically might be UDP, but potentially video as well. As I mentioned, already enhances our existing event native offering. And we'll cover that in just a second here. But I don't want to pause. And Anthony, if you wanted to add any technical detail here, feel free. But if not, we can keep moving.
No, you're good.
Cool. Good. Alrighty. So like I said, expose more things. So I sort of think about what you can expose in Gravitee. It's not perfect, but essentially sort of 3 classes of what I call exposables. That first being your sort of traditional backend API. You have a data source, put API, typically a backend REST API or HTTP API on top of it, and you expose it to the world. But instead of exposing it directly to the world, you put a gateway in front of it, something like the Gravitee gateway, and you expose a gateway API. It's just a proxy API. So instead of exposing the actual backend API directly, you expose it via that API, and then your client applications call that gateway API. The gateway then enforces all sorts of cool logic like rate limiting, authorization, authentication. There's data transformations of all kinds, all sorts of things you can do. If you're interested in what all that looks like, I highly recommend checking out our documentation. We have dozens and dozens of what you call policies that you can enforce at the gateway level. The important thing is to know that it essentially makes the exposure and consumption of these resources more secure, more reliable, more efficient, et cetera, et cetera. So that's your first class, sort of traditional FLAPM, expose backend REST API as a gateway HTTP API. The second thing, and this is where Gravitee starts getting really unique, is the ability to expose event or message broker resources. So instead of having that backend API that you're exposing via the gateway, you're essentially layering the Gravitee platform, the Gravitee gateway, right on top of something like a Kafka or an MQTT broker or a Solace, and you are actually exposing a gateway event API, because that's one thing you could call it, via the Gravitee gateway. Essentially, it's an API that exposes access for producing to and consuming from that backend event or message broker resource. Now, what's really interesting here, let's say that it is Kafka, it's one of the more common ones that we run into. You can expose that as an API that communicates over various protocols, right? So this is where it gets really interesting and really beneficial for, you can think about something like a client apps being mobile apps, web apps, et cetera. Typically, especially if you're exposing things externally, those client applications don't want to have to consume and produce over the native Kafka protocol. I guess you could set them up as native Kafka clients, but it's not what most folks want to do when building those client applications. So what you can do with Gravitee is mediate between something like that native Kafka protocol and something that's a bit more client and consumer friendly, like HTTP protocol, WebSocket, server-side events. You can actually even expose it as a webhook subscription. So it's one API that can expose that message or event broker resources over those various protocols. And then, of course, you still get all the cool gateway logic, data transformation that you're used to, pushing it in developer portals so you can make them self-service, event API products, monetization. The possibilities are endless. Think, what have most teams been able to accomplish with traditional FLAPM when exposing REST APIs? Now you can take that to the event API, message broker, event broker universe. And now what we're doing today, as of the introduction of the TCP proxy API, any sort of network application that you can expose TCP, you can expose it via the Gravitee gateway. We don't have as much functionality as far as gateway logic and all that stuff for this third class of exposables today, but it is something that we have in mind. We'd love to hear about you all's use cases, but that is what we have in mind for the future, is being able to take all of those sort of API productization, security, reliability stuff, and being able to apply it for these specific use cases. So those are the third class of exposables. With that, I always try to keep slideware minimal for these. I'm going to hand it over to Anthony. He's actually going to show how it works using the Gravitee product. So Anthony, I'm going to add your screen to the live stream and you are ready to go.
Yeah. So Demo Gods got me today, having a little bit of technical difficulties, but that's okay. We'll still talk through what this is, how it works, and how it looks in the UI and the API definition. For starters, we'll go ahead and show, I'll show two things. So the first is I'll walk through creating a TCP proxy API and deploying it to the gateway, and talk about how you set up the gateway and configure it to connect to the backend. And then we'll look at what the configuration options are like and try to talk through a real scenario. And maybe the Demo Gods will reverse their judgment on me midway through, but we'll see. So one thing to note is that in Gravitee APIM version 4.2, the UI does not have the TCP proxy configuration. So if you're interested in using that, you can work with us directly, and we can help you create the APIs. And we also have in our documentation commands that you can run to use our management API to create the API definition and deploy it onto the gateway. But I have a little bit of a sneak peek for the future versions. So I'll show you what it looks like in the UI, and then we can look at the API definition as well and see if we need to show you what it would look like to create that. So in the Gravitee API creation workflow, we have a new option here for version 4. I'll come through here. And you'll see now I can give, just like I do today, give my API a name and a version and a description. And now I get to the second step here. And now in this edition of Gravitee, I have my two options here for the proxy upstream protocol and intersect messages. And in this case, I'm running with a community edition, so I don't have the license installed here. But if I did, I could do that, and I could mediate these types of backends. But here I'm basically saying I'm going to proxy the upstream protocol, and now I have a new sort of flag here that's telling me I can do this via TCP. So I'll go ahead and select that. And then in my next option here, I have two choices. So in this case, like Alex mentioned, so we have the HTTP proxy. This is going to be your standard traditional HTTP gateway that's going to layer HTTP on top of the network communication. And then we have the TCP proxy option here. So I'll select that. And again, this is going to create an API JSON file. So in version 4.2, you can, I'll show you what that looks like in a second. You can create all this with just the API definition in the management API, but the fields are going to be the same. So I'll put that in here. So here, what happens is that on the gateway, we create a host that you can use to open a TCP connection to from whatever client that you're running. And that's going to be a socket connection. And we enable you to actually do this on multiple backend services and have multiple APIs running through the same gateway. And the way that we do that is through SNI routing, which is a function within TLS, wherein you can run multiple servers on multiple hosts on the same server, basically, or websites serve multiple resources on the same server. And that's what it was originally designed for. And we utilize that to use the header definition in the SNI declaration to figure out which backend to route you to. Now, if you're watching this and you don't know what that means, don't worry about it. But basically what this is saying is we can have multiple TCP APIs on the same gateway, even sharing the same port and so forth. So here I'd put a host, and in this case, I'd say localhost, but you would put really anything here, and this is going to be used on the gateway. This is going to be the server name that's the host name that's used on the gateway when the API is deployed to the gateway. And so that's my entry point, and that's really all I have to do with the entry point is just configure that host name, and then that's going to give me the proxy. So if you've used Gravitee before, you might be familiar with context path. So that's the full HTTP URL that has the that you call when you issue like a curl command. That's the equivalent of that is the previous step is the host in that case. So now I configure the connection to the backend service. So this is going to be my TCP backend service that maybe is listening or proxying from another upstream service, or generally has a socket connection exposable via a host and a port. And so here I'll give it, let's just say localhost in this case, and we'll just say 8080, but wherever you're running this service on, you can put it the port there. And then we have the SSL configuration. So this is going to be SSL configuration to the upstream. There's a lot of, I will say that the bulk of the complications with this is all in the TLS configuration between the client and the gateway, and then the gateway and the upstream. There's a lot of TLS configuration that happens there. So this is that information there for the backend. Now, for those of you who have used Gravitee before, you'll probably know that we have a lot of different plan options here. And in this version with TCP, we only support keyless plans. So this is intended to give you just sort of that first step of authentication. But because this is all using TLS, we're going to sort of piggyback off the TLS for the initial version that has the TLS configuration, so that we can, with SNI routing, you'll only be able to get somewhere for which you have a valid certificate. But in the future, we'll be adding MTLS plans for this so that we can verify the client certificate and do a bunch of other fancy things there. So I've got that, and then I can deploy it to the gateway. And again, everything is exactly how it looks like in Gravitee. Now, because this is at layer 4, there's a lot of things that we can't do with this. And in this first version, we'll have a lot of it kind of commented out. So obviously, the policies that we we act on here are going to be limited because we only have the packets flowing through the gateway. We don't have HTTP headers or anything like that. We just have the raw IP packets going through. So we will probably in the future add some policies to this, but we have limited for now. But we have the ability to add properties, resources, group access, and documentation, just like any other API in Gravitee. So it's all pretty standard stuff there. Now, again, because like we mentioned, this is right now not in the UI in version 4.2. This is going to have an API definition, and that API definition is going to look something like, let's see if I have it here. It's going to look something like this. Let's see if I can pull this guy out here. Yeah, let's just look at this. So it's going to have this JSON structure where you have the listener configuration, the API type, the entry point, in this case, TCP proxy, and then the endpoint configuration, which is TCP proxy, et cetera. And all this is going to be in our documentation. And then you'd run a set of curl commands using our management API to import this API into the gateway, or into the console, I should say, generate a plan, and publish the API and the plan. We have all that. We'll have all that in our documentation. So in the end, you end up with an API deployed on the gateway. There's also some configuration on the back end of the gateway that you have to do. And that's going to be in your Gravitee YAML file. And that's going to, I can probably pull up a example of that. Again, this is all in our documentation. But that's going to have something like this. So if you're familiar with Gravitee YAML file, you'll have the TCP server enabled with the port, a host, and a bunch of other configuration, and then all of the TLS configuration required to do the client authentication, which in this case, for demo purposes, we have a self-signed certificate, but you can also add a whole key store path and everything like that to do real TLS on the implementation. So this is the part where I feel like I've hit my limit of what I'm able to get through here, because what I would like to be doing here, I'm sure there's some simple configuration, but basically I have a TCP server here listening, and then I would issue TCP, issue a sort of like a connection to the gateway on that port, which is 4082, and it would route me to this API, and I could ping pong back and forth between, but I must have messed something up. So in any case, if you want to see that again later, we'll get it all sorted out and come back in the future. So,
yeah, I would add, if anybody's interested in speaking with Anthony a bit more in depth about this, or seeing a a demo where everything's set up and working as expected, definitely feel free to reach out on LinkedIn. We can always get those conversations set up. Also, if you have a specific use case around this or just questions about this, feel free to reach out, or you want to put them in your questions in the comments if you've joined a little late. So cool. With that, Anthony, was there anything else that you wanted to show on TCP before we?
Not for TCP.
Cool. All righty. Well, you'll be back on stage soon, talking about Kafka, showing Kafka enhancements and some of the V4 API improvements. So with this, actually, I'm going to ask you to explain what we've done with the Kafka stuff, given you are our resident streaming expert. Here.
Oh boy, that's what nice words. So we've added a couple enhancements to our Kafka connectors in version 4.2, and we'll continue to do so in the coming months. So because our Kafka endpoint is a plugin, we can release it separately, and so it's going to continue to evolve over time. The three main things we wanted to call out here for this given release are as follows. The first is the ability to specify a wildcard in a topic name. This is already supported by the Kafka consumer, and this allows you to create an API, one API that can consume from multiple Kafka topics simultaneously using a wildcard. We already support a list, but this way you can define it in a more generic form, and that will allow you to do a lot of dynamic things, because we have this in combination with the expression language that we have in Gravitee and path parameters and other advanced functionality where you can create an API that has dynamic configuration. You can now have one API that can manage a bunch of different use cases simultaneously. So it really simplifies the management layer there. And so I'll show a demo of that one, and that one I know for sure works. Next, we have the something that's, I would say, fairly deep in the weeds. For anybody who's watching this, who's come across OAuth in Kafka, you know that it's very complicated and a little, I would say, challenging to get set up. So we added the ability to add a custom callback class to the SASL OAuth bearer method. And basically what that means is that you can build a custom implementation for your OAuth interaction and OAuth flow when you use OAuth with Kafka and SASL OAuth bearer authentication. And that we also have a default class that we now ship that implements this for you as well if you don't want to implement it yourself. And that makes the authentication method much more robust and standard with the way that this works for Kafka. This is a topic, the SASL OAuth bearer, that, you know, if you start Googling, you'll find tomes of complicated information. So feel free to reach out again if you want to talk about this one in more detail. But bottom line is we have a much better and more robust way of supporting it going forward. So that's in this release. And then lastly, we added an option to our HTTP post entry point where we allow creating a message or empty message whenever the endpoint is called, even if there's no payload. And this allows you to, by creating that empty message, you can act and build an event workflow whenever that can be triggered with this HTTP post call. And this is particularly useful in the Kafka tombstone use case. So if you've come across that, or you can look that up in more detail if you'd like, but the ability to generate an empty message will enable you to act and potentially mark a set of the logs as tombstone and so forth from just calling that entry point with a post. So the point is, from a product perspective, we're really wanting to dig in and build out these advanced use cases, particularly for Kafka, and be sort of leading there in the event space. So
cool. Yeah, and as Anthony mentioned, we'll be showing this in just a minute here after we cover a few continued V4 API improvements. I have a slide next, I believe, that actually explains what we mean by V4 API. So if you aren't familiar with that, just bear with me for a minute. So it's four main things as of 4.2. Our Datadog reporter can now be used for V4 API. So if you're not familiar with Datadog reporter, essentially just in the entire wide world of observability and monitoring, there's often what folks refer to as an API blind spot, or specific API metrics as sort of at the moment of consumption, for example, these aren't captured in such kinds of dashboards using tools like that. So Gravitee, because we do capture that information, we do capture those metrics, and you can actually build things in Gravitee that you can also enable you to see that. But a lot of folks do want to bring their existing monitoring and observability solutions. So you can use Gravitee essentially to ship that information off to these tools and then build dashboards in your sort of centralized monitoring and observability solutions, such as Datadog. The GKOs, or Gravitee Kubernetes Operator, which essentially enables you to manage Gravitee resources such as Go APIs in a declarative fashion using Kubernetes. So it's a totally Kubernetes native way to manage your Gravitee stuff. This is, of course, in addition to the management API that Anthony mentioned earlier and the GUI. All those things you can use to manage your various Gravitee resources, configure gateway settings, et cetera, et cetera. But now the Gravitee Kubernetes operator can be used to manage your V4 APIs. There's logging, so you can view and filter logs for V4 APIs in the GUI, which is a big deal, given that that's something most folks want to be using their API management platform for. And API documentation, it's only marked down today, but you can use the GUI whilst creating Gravitee V4 APIs to create markdown style API documentation, which is super useful when you're putting your APIs in something like the developer portal, which I believe that Anthony will be showing us in just a minute here. But before we do, let's talk just really quickly about what a V4 API is. It's just an API that uses our V4 API definition. We have documentation, blogs that cover exactly what an API definition is in Gravitee. I'll send those over right when Anthony starts demoing. I'll send some links in the comments so folks can read that if they're curious. But you can think it's essentially almost like a gateway spec, not to be confused with the API specification, but it's essentially a set of instructions that define what your what's involved in your API, what policies are being enforced, entry points, endpoints, just JSON representation of everything the gateway needs to know about that API. V4 API specifically, in that API definition, it introduced multiple things. But one of the really important things is that we decoupled what we call entry points and endpoints. TLDR there, endpoints, essentially what is that? Sort of backend resource or target that you want to expose. Entry point, how are you exposing it via the gateway so that client application can consume it? So let's take that example I mentioned earlier of trying to expose Kafka over, let's say you want to expose it as an HTTP or a REST API and a WebSocket API. You'd see in that V4 API definition, the endpoint would be Kafka and the entry points would be HTTP and WebSocket. Right? So that decoupling was something very important that we introduced with that new API definition, as well as a bunch of other stuff. But really, that's the definition you have to use when you are exposing things like event and message broker resources, and as of today, something like TCP proxy APIs. So with that, Anthony, I will hand it back over to you to show what it looks like. Sort of take an API or create an API, goes through the entire API lifecycle, right? Create it, do some cool stuff to it, some documentation on it, push it in the developer portal, and make a self-service API product.
Perfect. So in this case, let's imagine the scenario of we as the API publisher are exposing data from Kafka to be consumed by end users via any number of entry points, like you mentioned, Alex. But in this case, I'll show server sent events. So you would have client applications coming in, all subscribing to different, potentially different topics, or even a slew of topics that you'd like them to be able to access. So here I've got a Kafka API set up. I won't go to the whole creation flow, although we can do some small edits as we go along to show what the lifecycle management process looks like. But just to walk through the setup, so here I've got a API. We'll focus on the server sent event one. So I have server sent events entry point. That's where the user is going to call this API on this context path. And then in the backend, pointing at a Kafka endpoint, I will have my Kafka configuration, which is going to have access to my Kafka cluster, and then the consumer and producer configuration here. I'm just going to use the consumer, and we have our typical Kafka configuration. We have a new option here. So previously, this was just a list of topics, but now we have either the ability to specify a list of topics or a topic expression. And so this is going to be a Java regular expression that's going to match a set of topics. And here you can see I've set it up already. It's live stream with live str period plus. So that's going to pick any topics that match this live stream, or I should say live str topic. So now I'm just going to show Kafka management UI, but you can imagine this, and if you're using the CLI as well. So here I've got two Kafka topics. You can see I set these up already and push some messages in them. So this is topic one, this is topic two. And so in theory, what should happen is that I should be able to make a HTTP request to Gravitee. The gateway will pass that on and mediate the protocol and go to Kafka and create a Kafka consumer that's consuming from multiple messages or multiple topics simultaneously. And the key thing here is that I didn't have to specify all the topic names in here. I could obviously it could have been simple, and in this case, it's a simple demo. I could have done live stream 1 and live stream 2, but if I've got hundreds of topics or dynamically created topics or topics with a name format that I want to make generic, and I don't want to hard code those in the topic list, I can put this topic expression in here, and I don't have to manage it or update anything in my API. It'll take care of it for me in the Kafka consumer. So first thing I'll do is show just calling this API, and then we'll get a chance to go back and look at the API documentation and portal side of things. So let's get our terminal pulled up here. So here's my terminal. And I already have an API key set up for this API. So, but we can go through the process of creating another one if we'd like to do that. And what I'm going to do here is start a server sent event connection. So I'll do that, and I've got the command ready to go, and hopefully my variables are already set here in the shell. I set them before we logged on here. And I'll zoom in a little bit here so it's a little bigger. Okay. So I start this, and now what's happening is I'm making a HTTP request using curl to this to my gateway. That's what this is referring to, and then it's passed into this context path, and it's polling, looking for messages. So now let's go back over to Kafka and create some messages. So the first thing here, you can see I've got some messages here, but I'll put here I'll put hello from topic 1 for live stream. Okay, and then let's actually check. So you can see here I got the message, hello topic 1 from live stream. Connection still maintained, still talking to one API. And if I go over to live stream topic 2, I can say hello live stream. This is from topic 2. And you can see we've got all the different values there as well. So then if I go over here, you can see I have my next message. And again, the key idea here is that I didn't create a new connection. I didn't create a new API. I just pointed it at this topic expression, and the API captured data from both topics. So again, we could do this already with a hard-coded list, but now we can do it with a topic expression, and that's really powerful in that sense because it's much easier to operate that way. Now, just to maybe do one more little, hopefully fun thing, let's go back and maybe add a policy in between. So what's cool about this is you can imagine in the subscribe phase here, you can imagine doing all kinds of fancy things that we have here, anything else you can do to the messages. So here, let's just say we could add some sort of dynamic body transformation to the data. And we have all kinds of expressions here, but let's just say for here, in this case, I'm just going to say override the message with this new message. So I'll add that policy, save it, deploy my API. And now you can see we're basically going beyond just regular traffic shaping. We're actually here we can actually transform messages, and we can create API products that users can actually do real transformation on the message here. So here you can see my API disconnected because I redeployed it. So here I'll come in and I'll go ahead and do one more publish. And if I do that and come here, you can see, oh, my message was overridden with the policy. And again, you can do fancy dynamic things with all kinds of cool policies there. So that's that. I'm going to go ahead and kill this connection here and come back to the console and look into some details about the API. So a couple new things we have here. Firstly, we have some improved analytics here. So you can see a lot of nice new details about what's going on. We actually have the message level details, and you can turn this off if you don't want the gateway to log this, but you can see here what the message looked like going from the endpoint to the entry point. So you can see that it actually changed here, and we have a bunch of other information related to the message and the operation. And then if your message has headers and metadata, which it often does with Kafka, you can visualize that here. And then you can see the top level information here about the plan, the HTTP method, and the response status here. And there's a bunch of filters. So this is a big brand new thing that we introduced for version 4 APIs and 4.2 are these nice new application logs. Now let's also then look at the documentation. So again, like Alex mentioned, we've had this feature for quite some time with our general sync APIs, but now we have the ability to do this for version 4 APIs and add documentation for a version 4 API, just like you can do with version 2. For now, this is started in, this is just supporting Markdown, but in the future, we're going to add support for many other, all the other things like Open API, Async API, etc. So just a couple things to highlight here, especially for the experienced Gravitee users. We have a new link here where this will take you directly to the developer portal and show you the API in the developer portal, so you don't have to go to the developer portal and try to dig around and find it. We also have a new workflow and editor here. So it's all updated UI. We have the ability to reorder the pages, unpublish them, edit them, etc. And then we have a new sort of folder creation modal and page creation modal. So I've already created a page here. You can see that here. And we've got a new Markdown editor in here. So we have the ability to put the Markdown, see the live preview, toggle the preview, and do all kinds of, whatever you'd like to see with this. So you can put your Markdown documentation in here to work with your API, and you can link it to a Markdown page from your GitHub repository if you have it integrated with your API. Again, there's a lot of stuff we're going to be adding here in the future, but for now, we have the ability to actually do this in the console, and we're very excited about that. So I'll just go through real quick, creating the page. So let's just say another important page. And when I come over here, we have the page content. We can say how to use this API. Say it is important that you can call this API with a wildcard topic, and then you can do start here, then do this. So again, the content's not super important. You can toggle the preview on and off. That's I think a lot smoother of an editing experience. And if you can imagine the future, you upload the page. It's very easy to edit this here compared to how maybe it looked before. We can save and publish this. Now I've got my 2 pages here in this nice new looking thing. I can move them up and down. And then come back over here to my page, and you can see in the portal, I've got documentation on how to use this API and the Markdown pages showing here. And then lastly, just to highlight, so if I go back to my terminal, so when I issued this server sent events, or when I started the server sent events connection, you can see here I've got like one entry point, or one context path, I should say, connecting to the API, and then I give it my API key. This is generated from a subscription, and there's a lot of important things we do with this with the subscriptions when we manage offsets in Kafka and manage the delivery guarantee or quality of service on data coming from Kafka through the API. So this is going to have your API key configuration here, and then just like always in Gravitee, you can come in here into the portal, look at documentation about your Kafka API, and subscribe to it, choose an application, and create your subscription request here. In this case, because I set up the API to automatically validate the subscriptions, I should be able to come back to my to here and get to my application, this is a different application that I have. Look at my subscriptions, see my topic, and I can also see that back in the console side. So if I'm the API publisher, I can come in here, see my plans, see my subscriptions, see the API subscription that was just created, and view the information about it here and manage it here as well. So both sides of the coin here. And the key idea here is that, again, if you're creating an API product on top of Kafka, you can do all the same things that you can do with Gravitee with the traditional REST API with your Kafka data as well. So there you go.
Cool. All right. Thanks, Anthony. Yeah, so I think that we should wrap up right around here. I think we're coming in right around 40-ish minutes, which is perfect, right on time. Just so you all are aware, if you do want to learn more, I did share some resources in the comments. This live stream will be replaying for some, I don't know how long, typically a few days. You can still find it. So if you want to rewatch it, feel free. But if you want to go read some stuff, I did share a link to the release overview blog on our website right there in the comments. A link to the release notes. We actually linked the specific TCP proxy docs in there as well. So you can find that if you want to try and play around. And of course, if you have any specific questions about your use case and you want to speak to someone at Gravitee, you can always head over to our demo page. Our solutions engineers are always online and looking forward to speaking with you all. So with that, if there aren't any other questions, and I'll just check the comments and see any, that looks like we are good to go for now. Of course, if you do have any comments later and add them to or any questions down into the comments, we'll answer those sort of asynchronously. We'll make sure to reach out to you. So anyways, thank you all for coming. Let's get any questions, comments, leave them on LinkedIn, and we hope to hear from you soon. Anthony, thanks for joining and showing everybody the product. It's all super interesting stuff. And yeah, I think we should have another live stream about 2-ish weeks. So just keep an eye on your LinkedIn feed so you all can sign up. But yeah, have a good morning, afternoon, evening, depending on where you are in the world, and we'll all talk soon.
Thanks, Alex.
All right, bye.